Good morning. It's Reverend Mike Capron from the First Presbyterian Church of Troy, Pennsylvania. Um, Considering some texts from First and Second Samuel today, what do you do when confronted with the unthinkable? Well, we're going to look at two ancient kings of Israel, Saul and David, who are facing crises, and compare their reaction. One faces military disaster, both for the nation and for himself personally. The other faces the imminent death of a child. Our first king was king before David was, King Saul. This is during the time, in fact, when Saul was hunting the fugitive David. Saul was about 60 years of age. After a great start to his reign, he has strayed further and further from God. Much of the fault was his own, although he may have had some health challenges that worsened the situation. As we start chapter 28 in the book of 1 Samuel, he's facing another military threat from the Philistines. Here's verse 5. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. So he's afraid. And let's give him credit. His first impulse is to pray. But he doesn't feel like the Lord answered him, so he quickly looks for another plan. He decides to go consult a spiritualist, a medium, someone who claims to be able to talk to the dead. One of the servants knows of a woman in the town of Endor who fits the bill. Bit of a problem here. The law of Moses forbids God's people from going to sorcerers, mediums, wizards, and the like. Different translations use slightly different words to mean the same thing. Saul actually thought he'd banished all these people from the land, but at least one was still around, probably being discreet about what she did. The king goes to her openly. She'll probably think he's there to kill her, so he goes in disguise, and a couple of his people go with him. I'm going to start reading 1 Samuel 28, starting at verse 11. The woman said, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" Meaning, which dead spirit shall I call up? He answered, "Bring up Samuel for me." When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are King Saul." The king said to her, "Have no fear. What do you see?" The woman said to Saul, "I see a divine being coming up out of the ground." He said to her, "What is his appearance?" She said, "An old man is coming up. He is wrapped in a robe." So Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed down with his face to the ground and did obeisance. Those of you who've been around for this whole sermon series will remember that Samuel was the prophet of the Lord who anointed Saul to become king. Samuel died a few chapters before this story. Then Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul answered, "I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. So I have summoned you to tell me what I should do." Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you just as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek, therefore the Lord has done this thing to you today. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me in the place of the dead. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." Immediately Saul fell full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel, and there was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. Let me mention a couple of things before I talk about Saul. First, this is a weird story, but those of you who know me know that I love the weird stories of the Bible. Second, don't go see mediums. I really don't believe in that stuff. It's mostly done by charlatans and con artists as a trick. Listen to Moses. Don't get involved. However, the way this story somehow got recorded or retold, this woman apparently really did call up dead Samuel to speak with his former protege, Saul. Third, there's a weird epilogue to this story. Afterwards, Saul is in a bad way, filled with fear, stressed out, and practically fainting. So this woman who talks to dead spirits, likely of modest means, goes to great expense to prepare a meal fit for a king, for Saul to nourish and strengthen him for what is to come, his last battle. It is worth remembering that even when we meet people who believe and act in ways very different from us, that they are human beings, and they may be kind and compassionate. Fourth, Samuel's words come true. Saul and the Israelite army lose the battle. Saul, wounded, kills himself rather than be captured by the Philistines. His son and heir, Jonathan, is killed too. Let's review how Saul handled this crisis. He did pray, but he gave up quickly and then wandered off the path of faith, seeking something else to give him comfort and guidance. In essence, he goes looking into his past. He is nostalgic for the good old days when Samuel blessed him and when his kingship was going well. But for him, for most of us, there is no real comfort in the past when you are facing a new crisis. New crises must be recognized as new and addressed creatively and effectively, seeking God's help to meet the needs of the moment. Now, before I say anything more about Saul, let me read how David responds to a different crisis. We're picking up where we left off last week. The prophet Nathan has confronted King David and pointed out his sins of adultery and murder, which underlie his marriage to Bathsheba. Listen to the way David handles the situation. 2 Samuel 12:13-23. David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." And Nathan said to David, "Now the Lord has put away your sin. You shall not die. Nevertheless, because by this deed you have utterly scorned the Lord, the child put to you shall die." Then Nathan went to his house. The Lord struck the child whom Uriah's wife bore to David, and it became very ill. David therefore pleaded with God for the child. David fasted and went in and lay all night on the ground. The elders of his house stood beside him, urging him to rise from the ground, but he would not, nor did he eat food with them. On the seventh day the child died, and the servants of David were afraid to tell him the child was dead, for they said, "While the child was still alive, we spoke to him and he did not listen to us. How can we tell him the child is dead? He may do himself some harm." But when David saw that his servants were whispering together, he perceived that the child was dead, and he said to his servants, "Is the child dead?" They said, "He is dead." Then David rose from the ground, washed, anointed himself, and changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. And then he went into his own house, and when he asked, they set food before him, and he ate. Then his servants said to him, "What is this thing you have done? You fasted and wept for the child while it was alive, but when the child died, you rose and ate food." He said, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, 'Who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me, and the child may live.' But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will not return to me." If the fight with Goliath was David's finest hour as a young man, this, in my opinion, is his finest hour as an older man. Realistically, it's almost the last good story about David. In the latter part of his reign, he becomes passive, hesitant, easily manipulated by his family and his advisors, leading to family trauma and destructive conflict in the country. Having a petulant, aging ruler is not good for any nation. But many people, including David's own servants, find his behavior in this story puzzling. So let's get into the details. David has committed the most horrific acts of betrayal and treason, which started with his adultery and grew into the intentional deaths of 18 soldiers on the battlefield. In a modern democracy, one would hope that he would be impeached and prosecuted. But This is a fledgling monarchy, not a modern democracy. The prophet Nathan, thank God, skillfully confronts David, who is morally horrified at his own actions and readily confesses his sin. This is a good moment for David. He still has a conscience. A long time ago, God said that David was a person after God's own heart. In this moment, David proves that he still has some of that within him. The next thing that happens is that Nathan tells David that God has put away his sin. The language is similar to what one might use about crossing a bridge. You did cross the bridge, but it is now in the past. But the line David crossed, like most grievous sins, will have consequences. The child conceived in adultery will die. It is very hard for modern audiences not to hear this as God punishing the child. I really don't have time to dive into that. I'm just going to say that if you follow the flow of this story, it is David that is being punished, and the nameless child is merely the means of David's punishment. Mental health note. If you have a sick child, it is highly unlikely that the cause of the child's illness is your sin. Don't go there. Unhealthy approach. No good will come of it. And mental health note. Back to David. All the doctors report to David that his newborn child will not live long, that it will die very soon. I picture David asking the doctors what can be done, and I picture them answering, pray. So David prays. And whatever else you think of David, he is not a half-hearted, indecisive person. He doesn't utter a short prayer and move on. He pleads with God for a week. To demonstrate his own penitence and desire, he stops eating for a week. He also stops sleeping on his bed. He sleeps on the stone floor for a week. The servants get really worried about him, so much so that when the child dies, they don't want to tell him. They reason if he's doing this to himself while the child is still alive, how much worse will it be when he learns that it is dead? But the opposite happens in verse 20 when he learns the child is dead. Then David rose from the ground, washed and anointed himself, and changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord, and they set food before him, and he ate. He explains in verse 23, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me, and the child may live. But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him in the place of the dead. He will not return to me. Back in 2020, when the stock market was plunging, I remember a radio commentator talking about investing. He said, it makes no difference whatsoever how you got to today. You own the stocks you own. They are worth what they are worth today. There is no point at all in reviewing the past and kicking yourself for past decisions. You must live completely in the present moment. And I think David knows that same message with regard to his situation. When the child was alive, David could try to change God's mind. Once the child was dead, it was dead. It's quite astonishing to me how quickly David was able to make that turn. His ability to perceive and act on the present reality was definitely one of his strengths. King Saul couldn't do that. All he could do was seek solace in the past, to procrastinate the pain of the present moment. When he faced his crisis, Saul couldn't pray to the Lord for more than 5 minutes before he wandered off to try something else. When the results with the medium didn't help, he was paralyzed. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think, couldn't act. He winds up losing a battle and committing suicide. Tragic. But David prayed incredibly hard for a week. And when he learned the child was dead, took care of some grooming, then worshiped the Lord. Think about that. David's prayer did not change the situation. The child has died, but David still goes and worships the Lord before breaking his week-long fast with some food. Remarkable. Many people of faith have tumultuous periods when they aren't happy with God. The Psalms are full of that kind of language: accusation, appeal, lament, repentance. anyone who's ever told you that having faith is a guarantee that you will never face any trouble or grief in this life, they were badly mistaken. The truth is that having faith means that you do not face trouble or grief alone. You do it in relationship with the great Lord of the universe. You can complain to God, you can appeal to God, you can receive comfort from God. God is with us, and we are with God. O come, Emmanuel. Try to be more like David than Saul. Saul was trying to live in the past. David engaged the present. Saul was aimless. David was intentional. Saul was weak-willed. David persevered. Saul went looking for alternative spiritualities. David prayed hard to the Lord of the universe. Saul was helpless when his alternative spiritualities failed him. He needed someone to feed him like a baby. When the Lord did not grant David prayer, David got cleaned up, worshiped the Lord, and had breakfast. I've said it many times. The Bible is not a propaganda document. If it was, stories like David and Bathsheba would have been edited out. David is a complicated character who sometimes did terrible things. But in these 11 verses, he shines. Try to be like him. Be a person close to God's own heart. Whatever you face this week, live in the present moment. Pray hard. Trust God. Keep worshiping and praying. Amen. God bless.